Thanks for the invitation, and sincerely I look forward to perhaps sharing some insights that might be of value to you as you think about your roles as junior leaders. Some of you obviously are in service right now, going through a transition into the officer realm through a formal education process. But in a sense, you've exercised leadership, and in many ways you have your own insights and perspectives. What you want of your leader, and perhaps what you want of your service members of you. Dave mentioned that we served together, and it was a friendship that evolved and developed and has become very genuine. And that's part of the benefit of being a fraternity like a service that I think may not be available to other communities. As we form in crucibles of training, etc., very quickly, those bonds that keep us together, and sustain us in many cases, perhaps in harm's way, I'll talk about that, which I think is a unique topic. I retired, as Dave said, after 28 years. My last role after the types of command, I've got about 40 months of what you might call RCT command time, or captains of a ship, or squadron, etc. And that's a lot for our tour, but I didn't share with Dave. I turned down command too, mostly because I was losing my family. And so I'm going to lay out some things that are transparent, that a lot is demanded of you, and one of the things you have to navigate through your journey in the uniformed service, because of the duty that's expected of you, is to find a sense of balance. And don't take that lightly, but don't be naive to think it just works. You have to work at it. Much like you have to work on your relationship within your own teams that form the nucleus of what it is you do, whether you're an infantry squad leader, or want to be a platoon leader, or you're running some director on a ship, or you have other functions that provide value to your organization. My last role is in kind of the position I hold now at the Army School for Command Preparation. We have a different model of developing our command teams, our officers in general. And we have more of a progressive education system, and historically we're more aggressive as a service in ensuring these education requirements are met. We don't fleet up like you might do in the Navy. We don't identify an individual for command and then sort of take him out and ensure he or she receives the education in a more clear path, because much of your branch requirements, particularly in the Navy, are technical, and I can relate to that. But we do have schools that are geared to the continuing adult learning of officers, and importantly to us now, our senior non-commissioned officers, our command sergeant majors, who attend the same pre-command programs that the officers do. I work almost exclusively with the captains in your service, the colonels in the Marines, and the colonels in the Army. Particularly I work with the Army. Those are the command formations that are large and diverse, in many cases multifunctional. And I also teach a little bit, if you may have read it, if you get a chance to read it, I teach a little bit for the School of Business here at Kansas University. I live in Leavenworth, Kansas, where my family grew up. My father was a career infantry officer. He was badly wounded in Vietnam in 1969, died when I was young. I'm married to my high school sweetheart for going on 30 years ago. I have 4 children. My oldest daughter just gave birth to our granddaughter, first grandchild, on February 14th, so that's kind of cool. She lives in Atlanta. I have a daughter that played basketball for one of the other Big 12 schools. We don't talk to her very often, but she played at Iowa State for a little bit, but she's in a medical program at the Southern College of Optometry in Memphis. She suffers from depression, and it's severe. And while in command on multiple occasions, I worried about the phone call I got from home, because there are occasions she could be suicidal. I'm sharing that for you for a reason. It's not something that most people feel comfortable telling a little bit about themselves. But your men are going to, and women that you serve, are going to want to know about who you are. What really makes you think about why you think. It has informed my life, and I didn't necessarily handle it well while in uniform. I'm handling it better, but I think about it often. And in our service, particularly those in the Army, we know we have evidence of PTSD, depression symptoms that are manifestly causing challenges for the Army. We have about 2 divisions worth of service members on active duty that can't deploy. And they're going through what we call warrior transition units. These are men and women that, by and large, served honorably and were affected by whatever they saw in war or experience or claim they did, because there are probably some that are cheating the system, trying to get some entitlement that will serve them some compensation for the rest of their life at government expense. And these are challenges. These are people you deal with. I don't deal with them anymore. I deal with the folks that sort of set the climates of command environment that you're going to be in. My other son is a UK grad, and I have yet the heart to call him since they lost to the first round of Robert Morris in the NIT. He's a big basketball fan, and he's also has this degree from advanced business degree from that school, and just is now moving to Atlanta. My youngest son is a extended junior, I call him, where he's a new senior at James Madison University in Virginia, and he struggles with school. It's not as easy for him as it was for the other siblings he has. But he's a good kid. He was recognized nationally by the National Red Cross for saving 2 children's lives that were drowning. And we have his medal from that institution in our home and proudly display it. And on one hand, he does this, the other hand, he can get himself in jail if you allow him. I mean, he's just kind of crazy that way. I'm working through that because in my heart of hearts, he's a good person. And when I think of him, I'm looking at you. You're his age. Todd, he's 22. That's where we are. But Dave asked me to talk, and I thought, it's hard to figure out what's appropriate for young men and women that are going to embark upon this significantly noble career. You know, less than 1% of Americans serve in the military, and then a smaller percentage of them serve in harm's way within the military, where your life literally is at risk, and you think about things differently. And so I asked if I could share a topic I recently presented to your bosses at more senior levels at the Air War College, and I did that on September 11th this year. Sad to say, I was invited by one of my other deputies, and I don't want to make light of this, but just recently killed himself. Took his own life here in December as an active duty Army colonel. We don't have really evidence why. We have some theories, no notes, all this stuff, but it troubles us because we do know he suffered from PTSD given the horrors of combat we saw. And I hope that in our journeys we can put our arms around it. And I'm sharing that up front because you're going to enter organizations whose members may have seen or experiencing things differently than you have. Because they're junior to you in rank doesn't mean they're obviously junior to you in experience, life skills, etc. And the message implicit in that is you can learn from them, even though you have the legitimate authority as the senior and the junior officer. Open your minds and be very, very cognizant that everybody can add value, but hold people accountable, as Dave was suggesting, to the standards. If you have things due, etc., hold to it. But how you teach them, coach them, and importantly, how you learn from them is really something you should give some thought to. You need to do that now as you prepare, because when you're in a condition where the crises exist, I suggest to you they're going to rely heavily on you. In order to rely heavily on you, they've got to trust you. 9/11. Where were you on 9/11, anybody? What age, grade? Yeah, anybody?
Sir, I was in high school. I was driving to class when I heard the first report that, well, it was Johnny Dare. I'm sure you're familiar with that, being from Leavenworth. But said some idiots flew a small plane to one of the World Trade Centers. And I was in class, and they pulled us all out of class to watch the TV after the second one struck and the towers fell. Yeah. So we did that and we were released.
Where in high school were you?
Pleasant Ridge High School.
Oh, okay, so you're just down the street.
Yes,
we used
sir.
to kick your team's butt in football.
Where were we from, sir?
I went to Immaculata.
Immaculata, oh yeah.
Don't let that bother you the rest of the time. Okay, how about somebody else? Everybody else about that same time period? Yeah.
High school sophomore, I was in woodshop. And you found out about it.
All right, anybody else? Go ahead.
Sir, I was in 5th grade. My class was coming in from gym class.
Yeah.
I was going to say, cool, we're watching TV. My teacher stopped me right when I said cool and made it seem like I thought it was cool that the building exploded. I was embarrassed, sir.
You know, it's interesting, and I can imagine why you might share that now, but probably at the time it probably was cool. It was unique. In my experience, I was the G3, the Chief of Operations for the 82nd Airborne Division, which in the Army, really in the DoD, it's one of the 911 organizations. We have a rapid response requirement, 18 hours, we can literally, we've demonstrated, put a fully composed infantry battalion with some enabling capabilities on airplanes ready to take an airfield out in 18 hours, from alert to air. That's a lot. So that's about 500 paratroopers getting ready to go and jump out and take an airfield is what they primarily do. So as the chief of operations, for having that responsibility of coordinating all that, I just come out of a morning meeting similar to some of what you described in maybe this class, whatever, and I was with our CG, and I just came in and I saw the first airplane, I said, God, that's a really unfortunate accident. And then I saw the second one come in and said, wow, we're going to war. There's everything right now that I know has changed. But I put that up here just to remind you, because you know the stories of trauma and challenges. Do you know who this guy is right here? Anybody?
Isn't that Colonel Hal Moore, sir?
That's his book. He was the battalion commander, so he was the 05 commander there. But that's the lieutenant on there. His name's Ray Rescorley. Do you know his story? Okay, he was in Hal Moore's battalion. He also, in New York at that time, was a fairly high-profile business professional and had taken the duty from some of his teammates. In a sense, they had some rotational plan, as I understand it, and I'm going to use generalizations. I could read the script, but I don't know it. But Ray Rescorley was a lieutenant who valued his leadership responsibilities to develop and care for the men and women under his charge. In Vietnam, he was awarded awards for valor because he fought and had enormous respect and could communicate well with the men and women that he served, largely men in the infantry outfit he was at that time. In this case, he disregarded his own safety. First, he took the duty from others. Two, after he evacuated many people, he went back in to try to evacuate more. He never came out. This is a man who represents what you represent. And what allowed him to put himself in harm's way, and clearly the idea that he could die for others, is something that perhaps you could consider. Are you able? Will you be able to do that? What makes men and women under your charge willing to genuinely sacrifice of themselves for something greater themselves, their teammates? A lot of theories about warfare where I fight for the soldier or buddy or sailor on my right. I can only envision what it would have like to have been on a ship at Pearl Harbor, and that's kind of my limited knowledge of the Navy. Even though I've been embarked on underway with the USS Eisenhower and other capabilities, I have some limited time with the sailors, and my father-in-law was a sailor for a little while, but he also played basketball for Kansas State, so that's a whole different topic. But this is something we talk about, and the reason I bring it up to you, our doctrine doesn't talk about leadership in combat. It talks about leadership in general. And unique is the combat conditions change what your followers expect of you. Thus, you need to think clearly how you're going to deal with it. This is real stuff. Dave mentioned that I fought in a hard time. I did, like many of the Marines that may have served in Fallujah or Ramadi or other portions of Afghanistan, and Helmand Province and all that stuff. And I had very close friends who suffered. In my first 7 days of combat as a brigade combat team commander, I had about 7,000 soldiers under my command. We went into harm's way. The first 22 were killed the first 47 days and over 100 wounded. That's one every other day that you're trying to find, literally, in some cases, because of the explosions. And two, challenge yourself. And three, sustain yourself as young leaders. And two, inspire others to continue that we're on the right path when perhaps we're all questioning it, are we? It's hard. And if I evoke any emotion from you, it's not intended to discourage you. It's to remind yourself of what you do and what's expected of you as young service members, particularly young leaders within your respective services, to help others out. So we're going to talk about it, a little bit of an introduction. If you, I'm sorry, I keep going with this. If you don't mind, I'm going to leverage some of our Army doctrine, and we have a philosophy at command that's encouraging. It's called mission command. I realize your other services, but mine would be less authentic if I tried to tell you what the Navy teaches or what the Marines teach. I can share with you that in the command I had Marine battalions under my command. I was appointed by General Mattis personally to take this organization that Dave talked about. My boss was now Major General U.S. Marine Corps Dave Beidler. He positioned us to deploy, and then I worked for General Jack Kelly, who I became good friends with. It was a sad day when I heard of his son dying in Afghanistan. But it wasn't easy, Marines, for us to walk into your area. I'll share that. There's different cultures. The Navy has its own culture. Within the Navy, you have the air culture, I guess, the pilot culture, the SWO culture, and the submarine culture, and then probably everybody else. Marines, you're just hard-ass to get along with sometimes. And that's good, to the point that we need to work together, we need to be more accepting. I'm not trying to demonstrate bias, it's a little bit of humor, but it was a real problem for me. Because General Kelly told me up front, and I'm laying it on the line, hey, I really don't want you guys here. If I wanted, I told General Mattis I want more Marines. And about 6 months in the command, he said, Todd, I owe you an apology. I do. First, I didn't know much about you, and that you were the senior brigade commander on our team. And two, that you had experienced combat, probably that exceeds some of the combat my teammates exposed. And three, you never told us that. You just got done what we needed to do. And I was able to do so with great folks like Dave and the rest of the team that formed our organization. And we actually helped Marines out in a positive way, and as a result, we developed a friendship. So life isn't always fair when you're in the service. How you navigate through that is important. We're going to talk about this. In the bottom line, in a combat situation or an extremist situation, extremists will briefly talk about, because for you it could be a crisis. And the examples up there that I used in the business school is the derivative or the market crisis in 2008. When did we lose all our money, Dave? Was it about 2000 when we deployed?
1998, I think.
Yeah, all right. Well, we had some money invested, at least I did. I watched mine just go, and I didn't pay attention, but I thought, hope was a method, it wasn't, and so I'm still working pretty hard. That's okay, I enjoy it. But think about the statement. You have to trust your people, and you have to trust that they trust you. What makes anybody trust you? Why should you be trusted? You're the only first name I know, so I won't go there. Why should anybody trust you just because you're an ensign in the Navy?
Because I put your needs before my own, sir.
Okay. Is that what you want me to hear, or are you just bullshitting? Excuse my language. If it's on tape, that's okay.
Well, I'd like to say that as an officer, sir, that's one of my primary goals with the people that I lead.
Okay. And I hope I pronounced the grade. Gunny Sergeant?
Staff Sergeant.
Staff Sergeant Santos.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Why should you trust me? Or why should I trust you? How are we going to do that? You've got experience in units.
I usually trusted my senior enlisted and the officers because they have the experience and the wisdom and also gain the knowledge through education.
Okay.
So I expected that the decisions that they made would be correct.
Okay. Have you ever known a leader that's made bad decisions? Have you ever had a boss you just didn't like?
Yes.
Yeah? Do you trust him if you don't like him? Why don't you like him? What in your mind, just think about loud, what is it that enables trust to happen in an organization? Trust is relational. It's an exchange of currency. Bishop and Hart. Hope I say it right. I'm learning.
It's okay. I think that the absence of hypocrisy is important. If you sense even like an ounce of hypocrisy in the leader, you can't trust anything that person says because they're fake. So
Okay. Hypocrite. Okay. Well, that's good. That's a good start. And Captain.
For me, it was always watching my bosses do their job and do their job well.
Yeah.
They always led by example. If you could trust them to do their job right and treat you right.
Okay, so I've heard, I'm going to put anti-hypocritical. There's a lot of ways to spell a word, so don't get stung up on it. And if you ask me how I spell it, is that how you spell it? Well, you didn't ask me how it's supposed to be. You asked me how I was. You mentioned expectations because of experience, wisdom, etc. So you have an expectation. And I'm going to just, if this is okay with you, Staff Sergeant Santos, to say because they're confident. And you kind of expect them to know their job, their roles and responsibilities. Okay? What else? There's other good examples. Yes?
Setting the example.
Okay.
You need to expect more of yourself than what you expect of your people.
So that's a behavior that I kind of walk the talk. So if you ask me, if I tell you that I expect you to be on time, then I'm going to be on time. You know, and the one time you're not on time, everybody's watching you, how you respond to that, and how you're disciplined, if that's what requires to change your behavior. Here's an important formula for you, and I would consider it. And much what I'm sharing with you, just for your own edification, is what I share with senior leaders. Because the expectation of leadership varies as you type of organization, only in the sense of you might be more direct because you're in an execution role, but others, as you develop your leadership attributes and competencies, you grow. But this is about organizational behavior. Behavior in an organization is a function of personality plus environment. Okay? Your demonstrated behavior, this can be individual or collective. And behavior is important because it's going to affect how you perceive trust as well. In the end, you want your sailors and your Marines to do the right thing. You want them to accomplish their job, and you want to, more importantly, do it in an honorable way. Fair enough?
Yes, sir.
You want them to be proud of it. In an honorable way, I use a simple criterion. At the end of the day, I look myself in the mirror and say, I did the best I could, and I did it with the sense that my mom would be proud of me. She knows I tried. I may not make it right. I may not get it done exactly right. But I'm not going to say someone said, hey, he cheated to do it, or he stabbed somebody in the back to do it, etc. He was a team player. He didn't lie, cheat, or steal. Those kind of values that inform it, because you're vulnerable to doing just the other, particularly in harm's way. So how you handle that in combat or in extremis condition is something that's important. The environment, you can't basically change people's personalities. A lot of science in there, but for psychologists, most of us accept that your personality is sort of formed, your DNA and how you're wired is sort of formed by the time you're 11 years old. Yeah, you might have some idiosyncrasy or some quirk. That's who you are. Basically, it's how you operate. Things are important. But you can, leaders, change the environment. And this is where your energy is spent as leaders. Changing the environment, setting the conditions so that the behavior of yourself and your organization reflects what you espouse to be important. When you, as one shared at the very end, when you sort of set the example and walk the talk, you're saying my behavior reflects what's important to me and to us, and I'm proud of it. When you violate it, you might lose the very trust that's imperative for you to navigate through the journeys of combat. Now, how we're going to do this tonight? I'm going to talk a little bit about this, put some things for you to consider, and then I'm going to give you a situation that was a real situation for me in combat. But I'm going to put you where I'm at the brigade level. I'm going to put you into this organization called a platoon. So the Marines are probably more familiar with that structure. The sailors, as you're getting in platoons, about 30 minutes. So I don't know what you would call it on a ship, your department, division. So it's equivalent to division. And you're going to have to make a call. Basically, do you follow the order or not? And then I'm going to ask you why. And then how'd you come to that decision? Okay? We'll talk about it. Now, throughout, I don't want to be a lecturer. If there's something that's not clear, and I'll abbreviate, I probably have more slides than I need, and I probably have to be just mindful of time, because I realize you're doing this in the evening on a fairly decent day, if you want to call that in Kansas. Okay, so there's a framework, a little bit about leadership environment, just a broad review of what leadership is, and then in extremist context, we sort of hinted at it. The challenge, I think, for you, and then I'll entertain any questions, but I really want you to ask questions throughout. It's better if it's a dialogue. I've got nothing to lose. I have hopefully something that you might find of value, and I truly enjoyed the opportunity. Here's something that I explore with, and I share this with the commanders. Notice where I put the eagle, which represents the captain or the colonel in your respective services. In your study of military art or history, but particularly art, science of war, captains, colonels typically operate in what we call the tactical realm. That was pre-2009. The nature of warfare today grows. We're finding ourselves leaders, and you represent the star. You're the young officer. You're really in the tactical realm. You're ensuring getting your small division or your platoon to get things done. Except today, the nature of the conflict, which is informed by social media, the rapidness of which information can be exploited in a battlefield and sent, the conduct of your soldiers could have strategic consequences. That was my scenario, real life. I had soldiers who did not behave consistent with the values of the organization and under the pressures of conflict, raped and murdered an Iraqi family. It probably ended my career. I thought I was going to be relieved. Now, how we handled that was very honorable, consistent in many cases, overly protective of the constitutional rights afforded these gentlemen at that time to exercise due process. This was a small unit, basically a fire team within a squad, out on an outpost, who took upon themselves to exercise behavior, rape and murder a 14-year-old Iraqi girl, murdered her grandparents, and tried to get away with it. And evidence served. We dealt with it. All 5 have life sentences in prison. It's like the Haditha case, but different. In fact, my emotions associated with that were different. How I dealt with it and how I reflect on it now is important to you. What was my role as brigade commander? Some days I hold myself deeply accountable, and then other days I realized that was one of probably 115 platoons. I can't be everywhere. I wish I could have been. But you're there. There was a platoon leader there. How was it upon him that he would allow service members on his team to operate inconsistent with everything we did? Where was his leadership skills? Because he's out on his own. Alone and unafraid. Maybe alone. Definitely not unafraid. Perhaps very fearful of the challenges given the nature of the conflict we had. So we're going to get there. So, when I move you into this realm, you operate in that space, but your actions or failure to act, particularly under the pressure and the scrutiny of conflict, could have strategic consequences. This was exploited. We had to figure out how to make a bad situation well, and there was ways over time, eventually did. It had nothing to do with the success of the brigade. Abu Zarqawi was the #1 terrorist target for the Special Operations Community commanded by General McChrystal, supporting General Casey, who was the ISAF commander, and eventually General Petraeus, etc. It had a leader. He was this #1 operator of Al-Qaeda in Iraq at that time. My teammates to the left were the 5th RCT. We shared a lot of what we then called battle space, but we would share areas of operations. We're going to talk about it and how we built partnerships. But bottom line is my battlefield was more like Fallujah than it was like Baghdad. And we had a different view from the lens of my commander, who was largely in the city. Ours was sort of rural farmland, laden with anti-American conscious Sunnis who felt disenfranchised from this whole movement. They were fighting. They also harbored the terrorists. I share that as we move forward as a context because we're going to talk about, that was a tactical setting, but behavior of my organization here. And I encourage you to think deeply about how you're going to lead your team so that positive outcomes come. And if not, start thinking about how you're going to be effective as a leader. And maybe perhaps you'll start doing some self-reflection about what you can improve upon as you develop. Yes?
Sir, before we go farther, could you emphasize the difference between the technical and strategic and operational roles?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I was hoping you wouldn't ask that, but I'll try to. In the echelons of war, or the levels of war, we have strategic, which is those sort of objectives and aims. And do you take a military art class? I don't want to spend too much time.
Yeah, this,
Because I'll get to it real quick.
Of course, it's probably been a while since
Yeah.
these guys have heard of it.
Bottom line is I'm going to simplify it only in the interest of time, but I'd be glad to have a communication with you and dialogue this further, but it's not as relevant to the content I want to present. But I'm not going to try to wash my hands. I'm not a Pontius Pilate. What I want to share strategically is the level of leadership, 3-4 star, that puts together a strategy that tries to achieve the political aims. And the derivative naturally is, strategy is saying we want to have peace in the Middle East. Operationally, we've got problems in Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever you want to label it, in a way that we have to deal with the military, or deal with the threat. Operationally, we look at the available resources to the services or to the nation, and they're not just the military. It includes diplomacy, economic, informational, and we look at how to organize those very simply and bring those resources to the areas of interest that are affecting the instability of the Middle East. In this case, we label Iraq, and it could be Iran, etc. Those headquarters are often at the 2- and 3-star level. And as you notice, they overlap. It's the Venn diagram just to show there's some connectedness. But to further distill that down, then those leaders at that level translate guidance to your level of leadership through folks like Captain Schweitzer. Say, hey, take your Desron and position your ships here to do X. This particular destroyer is going to go to this port and have an engagement to meet with key leaders of this community to show goodwill. And through that, we want to amplify the communications with the local populace and local leadership that we're on the same community. And theoretically, they'll then empower their subordinates to, in a sense, create an opportunity for goodwill towards America. That's it. It's a unique profile for our ship. Others, like you might take, hey, I need the Marines to go in and seize this port so that this ship can come in, and you not only seize it, you set conditions, but you're looking at the tactical task of controlling the port. But the port has operational value because it can bring other resources in, ambassadors, civilians, military, etc. And then they do their task, and collectively we enable the strategic objectives to sort of be satisfied. That's a very loose, quick piece. What happens here is, in the past, because information wasn't readily exploited, etc., we didn't necessarily worry about it. He could go on a ship that, if the ship did okay or not so okay, he'd probably report to the Navy might exploit it. If it was good, probably kept it quiet if it wasn't. But people didn't see it. The environment you live in today, everything is shared. In many cases, you don't care. Soldiers got cameras, they put it on YouTube, etc. They tell their story. That is the speed of information of which you can't control, particularly in our professions, where you're spread out. Changes the nature of the domain of which we operate in. And so I share with you that lieutenants, platoons, divisions, possibly can have strategic consequences. And thus we share that the commander at your grade, the person who you sort of report to in a tactical realm, has to become more aware of that. That's really the intention. A little bit more time than I want, and I'd be glad to develop that further, but I'll miss my timeline. I really want you to exercise. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, so leadership, this comes right out of our Army doctrine. There are plenty of definitions of leadership. You probably have in your own service doctrines, you probably reviewed it, but you are leaders. You have the importance to influence people to do your will. Fair enough? It's as simple as that. Sounds easy, simple, it's hard to do. Our senior general, General Odierna, the Chief of Staff of the Army, this ADP is called Army Doctrinal Publication. It's fairly recently been produced. This is the expectation of leaders at all grades. Have a vision, lead change. Hard to have a vision sometimes at junior leaders because we only talk about it. In the business world, you might have a sense of it if you take some business classes. But the idea of you being a leader is important. But the second one is important to you. Be your formation's moral and ethical compass. We're going to talk about what that really means. Because you have standards to uphold. The institution for the Army defines them as leadership. You know, we value loyalty, We value duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Those all brief well. And for each of you, you may have your own definition of each one of those. I will tell you, within the Army's framework for values that define what we want to be recognized for, in combat, sometimes, or not in combat, just in general, but it might be amplified or intensified in combat, some of those values are in conflict. Loyalty and duty are the most common. My loyalty to Captain Schweitzer, developed through years of friendship, common sort of experiences in life, common generally shared values. If he were to commit a crime, would I turn him in if I knew it and no one else knew it? Would I hold him accountable? If you have soldiers, or in this case sailors or Marines under your command, and you know they commit something that you're not proud of, you might choose to turn them in. And perhaps if they're subordinate to you, you likely will. But if you commit a crime and you're his best friend, will you turn him in? If I say, Midshipman, how do I put it?
Where?
What's your first name? It's going to be
Brandon.
Brandon?
Tom.
Tom? If Brandon is sleeping with his wife, would you turn him in? If you're best friends?
Honestly, I probably wouldn't unless there was a
Yeah.
issue.
Well, why would you? Your duty is to do it. That's a criminal act on the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It erodes morale. Does it happen in our service? Yeah. So, up here, you said, I got to set the example. I'm going to tell you, chances are someone else knows he's sleeping with his wife. And they're looking at you, particularly if you're the lieutenant or the ensign, on how you're going to handle it. And the day you don't walk the talk, the day you start to break trust. When you break trust, when you really need to pull together as a team and row on that oar together, you might have those who resist. And you don't have time. This was real stuff. And we talk about it all the time, leaders, because we have it already. We're all human. We're vulnerable to these things. So how do you set yourself apart to do the right thing and, in fact, demonstrate the behaviors you say are important? These are our charges. This is what's expected of us. I'm sure in relative nature, it's expected of you within your own service doctrine. How you describe it, how you go about your business development leaders will vary. Another way to talk about it is the attributes of leaders, and it was reflective of what many of you said, character. We support the Army values, we have an ethos. Character is kind of what defines us. It's what our legacy is, what we want to be recognized. At the end of the day, you remember the movie Saving Private Ryan? Anybody watch that?
Yes, sir.
Anybody excited about an Army movie? Saving Private Ryan, at the very end of the movie, do you remember the gentleman who was, this case, Private Ryan, grown up, came sort of grandpa? Remember what he asked his spouse?
I hope I lived a good life, sir.
Yeah. Tell me if I was a good man. She specifically, tell me I was a good man. Tell me I earned the right of others giving their life for me to live. That I didn't let them down. Because I may not have been the most notarized man, the most notable figurehead. I may have never achieved the rank of X or had these great successes, but in the day, I have my family that says, yep, we're proud of you. You treated us well, you treated the people you made contact well, and you did what it is that people respect by and large. Because in the end, one day, like for me, you're no longer going to be in uniform. It's not about that. The success might be defined differently. But while you're in it, it becomes something part of you that you'll never lose hold of, if you will. It defines it. It's part of my DNA. This is what leaders are. So they have strong character. They're capable, which is intellect, which is kind of this. They're competent. And presence means they're generally viewed. Presence is really the perception of you. I may hold myself in one image that I think I'm a really good leader. I may say I was a really good instructor today, guest speaker. And you guys say, hey, he talks too much. I may not have that perception. I'm hoping I'm connecting. I'm trying to. The idea of presence for you is, how are you felt to be such by your subordinates that they trust you? And then are you there when you need to be? I use the definition of trust, three sort of criteria. You're honorable, you're competent, so you got the skills, and importantly, you're reliable. All three help define trust, because you may be the most competent person, but if you're never there when I need you, I don't want you on my team. I'll take someone less competent, but I know he or she will be there when times are tough. You don't want anybody not honorable, for sure. That's a non-starter for me. I relieved 3 officers in combat, one the very first day. He happened to be Air Force, so we'll talk about him. But I love 2 company commanders, one for line, the other for battle fatigue. Hard to do. The battle fatigue was incredibly competent up until the time that the war was wearing his butt out. I let him go. He's not going to, he moved on to greater major, but he'll never make beyond that, probably. Because of that. Wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but I had to look at the organizational goals and outcomes beyond it. It was hard for me personally to do. The honorable one, not an issue at all. Didn't hesitate at all. The Air Force one, you just make your own judgment. He didn't want to serve with the others were in the Hardems play where the others were serving. That's fine. You're not going to be part of this command. Gone. You're relieved. That's the end of your efficiency report. You're not going to be promoted to lieutenant colonel. You're a major at the time. I don't have any time for you. I don't even have time to talk to you about this. What we got to do. I need everybody to roll their sleeves up because we're all going to go on this together. Those are true stories. Okay, enough about leadership. Other examples, you can read about this. These are just books. But this one, if you look up leadership online and extremist leaders, you'll find it's not codified a lot of doctrine. And there's a difference up there. And then Mission Command, and I just say it, and we're going to get to it. Mission Command is this is from General Dempsey. This is a white paper that's informed all the service. Mission Command is a philosophy of command. It's a style of leadership. And basically it expects us to treat each other with dignity and respect, to be open-minded to opinions of others, to value diversity. It's one of the reasons I put this on here, because you're going through a period in the transitioning Army that will actually promote women in combat roles. Women in the infantry squads of Marines and Army soldiers. It's a different model than I grew up in. When I grew up as a lieutenant, in my brigade, my equivalent to an RCT, there were no gymnasiums for working out. There were no pull-up bars. I didn't know how much Marines like pull-up bars. And we show everybody how much they pull-up. We didn't have that. We were mechanized soldiers at the time, too. We had a bar for every brigade. And that light, we were probably more like the Navy, right? Kind of a mess. You guys, I'm either doing bad or I'm my jokes, but I'm okay with it. But in those bars, we had strippers. That was the culture. We had officers that basically said, what goes on in the bar stays in the bar. Did they walk the talk? No, because outside that bar, all of a sudden, now I'm a happily married man with children trying to lead organizations and be able to inspire confidence in the men and women. And, you know, I didn't respect that. I grew up in a fairly Christian-dominant home. And I wasn't connecting. And if I tried to connect to fit in, I wasn't comfortable with who I was. I was no longer authentic. And I'm wondering if I'm feeling like that, I wonder if others are feeling like that. And then 2, I have to, more importantly, ask myself, am I sending those kind of messages to my subordinates? So, Mission Command is really about being authentic, being capable, etc., and increasingly empower and take risks with your subordinates so they can lead consistent with their duties in their lane. It's just a philosophy of command. You're more than welcome to study it. I encourage you to study it because it's pretty useful doctrine after my experience of 28 years. And it's been informed by a lot of hardship through combat, how we operate. But in extremis, the definition is here. In the farthest reaches or at the point of death, things are going to fail or you're going to die. We're going to talk about this domain. The nature here has a different piece. And by design, I put those images up there. Those are real pictures. It may have pictures some of you may have mentioned you served there, for sure I did. In picking up Tech Sergeant Moss's body or portions of it, it's hard. You sustain that, you develop a numbness or you get sort of a barrier between you and reality. But over time, it starts to affect you. There were days I would not hesitate to say I would kill Iraqis. I was just tired of it. And I knew that was wrong. But your emotions, and each of you need to understand your decisions are always affected by your emotions. There's enough science out there. As rational as you want to be, real life is about emotion. And the current science on the neurology, how your brain wired, you actually, the electrons are the synopsis from you getting a stimulus that's something that's fearful, that creates fear or evokes some emotion, actually passes through a portion of your brain called the amygdala faster than it does the frontal lobe. And what it means to us, and we're seeing this through increasing studies, is that emotions always affect your decisions. So when you're angry, maybe you don't want to make decisions. When you're fearful, you might, because fearful might mean I saved my life. I don't act stupidly either, because I'm somehow guarding it. But it also may make you timid when you need to go forward to achieve a result, particularly like in an ambush. So example. So these are unique conditions. And they're unique in each of you may face these in a variety of forms. Crisis is similar but exclusive. It's a crucial time when stuff goes wrong, and in this case I showed the stock market crash. We're all going, what's a crisis? Our whole economy could fall apart. There's books out there that predict these other bubbles, that while we're enjoying some modest growth right now, that if we continue the $1 trillion debt thing, we're just all of a sudden, we're going to be overwhelmed. Our debt to the Chinese exceeds us. They're buying subs, by the way, recently from Russia, if you haven't followed the news. And they're a bona fide threat. We know they're increasing their arms capacity at an enormous rate. We know they attack us every day in the cyber community. Every day. Maybe 50 to 100,000 hits. And in most cases, they've penetrated more than they can share. And we just have to be very aware of it. It could create a crisis where our ability to communicate amongst each other, which is dependent upon electronic sort of hardware technology, could crumble. We don't know how to operate in space that we can't talk that way. We forgot how to read an analog map. We forgot how to chart paths because it's all been done by GPS or those kind of communication. I was in that space too, and perhaps still am. Undesirable outcome. They all evoke emotion. Here are some examples. In this case, it's a mixture of emotion and perhaps behavior. And when I listen to you, I think particularly, Hardy, I don't know your first name.
Dale, sir.
Dale, when you talk about being hypocritical, that's a behavior. In other words, I'm sort of acting differently than when I talk. It seems kind of incongruent. Other emotions are evoked. And then there's some others. Some guys are excited. I have service members that came to the military because they wanted to kill something. Really another human. They want to know what it's like to kill a human being. That's kind of not how I grew up. But it's interesting because it really tells you what about your organization? It's a question. The fact that the variety of emotions could be sort of evoked as a result of the same stimulus that what McSweeney sees, what McGaffin sees, or what Hardy sees, or others. Indifferent. What does that tell you about your organization? Think about it. Go ahead.
I'm sure that it is very diverse and it's difficult to align their priorities and make the work in a single direction.
Yeah, it's well said. You're composed of people who are not just like you, but you're responsible to lead them. They don't think like you necessarily, they don't want to act like you, but the uniqueness in the role of being a lieutenant or an ensign is you have to bring them together and build a team that we trust each other, they trust you, you trust them, that the emotions that we each will experience are controlled enough so we'll do the right thing. That's hard to do. I couldn't say it better than I. And it's important you start giving thought about it. How am I going to lead people when they're not like me, but I need to go forward? And your rank has some bearing. You have legitimate authority. Constitutionally, passed through law, managed by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, I have to do what a higher ranking officer tells me to do, as long as it's moral, ethical, and legal. Basic. The question is, will they do it when you're not around? And will you do it when you're in harm's way? You want to believe yes. My personal story tells you there's going to be others that say no. How do you create the climate where everybody on your team pulls together as a team and does the right thing to accomplish the mission in a way that we can look ourselves in the mirror and say we did the best we could and we're proud of who we are. We represent America. And that patch that says U.S. is pretty significant. Don't ever lose the value of that. Don't ever shorten or shortchange the value of that. Hold up to the highest of standards, because many of those good men and women that you may know personally have fallen on behalf of that. It gives us the enormous ability to talk just like this. Okay, so we evoke emotions. So, think about this. I've kind of described in very loose terms. Hopefully you start to open up your mind a little bit. Says, okay, I've got to be a good leader. And Ebel says, the pressures of combat or crisis or in extremis, harm's way, will change what's expected of me. Take a few minutes, just talk to each other, and come up in groups of your two, just the person next to you. What do you think are the desired attributes, the top 3 or 4 desired attributes of leaders in combat or in extremis conditions? Think about 2 minutes.
By far, maintain composure.
Exactly.
Quick thinking. Very,
Rational?
you're necker.
No, he wasn't.
Let's come back with you, shipmate. Take initiative, shipmate.
More valuable.
No, we can be inclusive.
No. We're so much better than that. Pull him in there. It doesn't matter, he said the guy next to you. Okay, so you need to be someone that, Dale. Someone that is able to take in a situation quickly, be kind of like fast thinking, be able to notice numerous things at once, and situational process them. Yeah, so good situational awareness.
So what's avoiding emotion?
Yeah.
Rationality?
Rationality.
Alright, not saying.
Aliens. Non-panicking.
Aliens?
You know, somebody's cool-headed, but could be fucking illogical.
Okay. In the interest of time, test questions up. Anybody, one group, just tell me the top one you think.
Courage.
Courage. Any other group agree with that? So, we gotta go in a group, so there's 1, 2. Okay, next competency.
Decisiveness.
Okay, that's fine. Decisiveness. Okay, anybody else agree with that? Wow, all decisive. Okay, let me get a count. 1, 2, 3, okay, I'm gonna guess 5, 6. That's too hard to count. Okay, close enough. Third attribute, comments. Yes.
Level-headedness, sir?
What?
Level-headedness?
Level-headedness. Okay, I like it actually. Level-headedness. Do you mind if I put calm? Rational?
All those words came up.
Okay, it's good. That's a good description. Actually, it's a unique one. I'm going to keep it for my class. I think it's very important. Yes?
Your integrity.
Integrity. Perfect. Was that number 1 for you group?
Decisiveness, what, sir?
Okay. Are any of these out of order? Right now I've got, does anybody have integrity number 1? Anybody have decisive number 1? Level-headedness? A few. Okay, so very, somewhere in the ballpark. Many of you said courage. What if I told you that based on studies of Marines and soldiers, after years of combat, that those aren't up there? That would kind of throw you off, right? That the number 1 competency expected is different, although you might adjust it. Something that you wouldn't expect. This was information to me. It's why I think it's important we talk about it. My thought process going in, after years of command and operational experience, was that the number 1 attribute expected of me as a leader when my life is on the line is different. But it's close. We'll talk about it. Colonel Pat Sweeney is a professor, a PhD, at the Army War College. He wrote a book informed by a lot of studies. This was his decisions. This was his observation. And then I'll share another guy who's retired 1-star who now teaches at Yale. He was the chair of the Behavioral Science Department in the Military Academy. quick ethical decisions are sort of aligned with the idea of decisiveness, right? I can make the decision, but it's imperative that they're
Ethical.
ethical. Okay. Leader character competence. I didn't see that up here as defined. In the other studies, the one I mentioned by Thomas Kolditz, who is a retired one-star now, competence is the #1 attribute of the followers expect of your leaders, that you can actually get them to survive. At all costs, think of that. At all costs. Haditha. If I shot, even though the evidence in the substantive view of the court, I don't want to mislead you and say I have a judgment, but I'll put a theory out there that the leadership was competent in destroying what they perceived as a threat. But there could be some skepticism that the threat that they killed was no longer a threat because they're children, etc., that typically weren't involved in combat operations against. Yes.
Can you give a quick synopsis of the detail
Okay.
for the context?
Are you familiar with that? I apologize for making that assumption. Thank you, Dave. Basically, you have a patrol Marines, northern Iraq, hard-fought area, etc. You have a village, and an IED goes off, killing or wounding some. Senior leader responded, was pissed off, angry, quickly does battle drills, what we call battle response drills. You probably have on ships when you got stuff coming in, you know, certain things, basically battle stations kind of thing. There's a battle drill to protect the immediate peace, and then one of the battle drills at that time in combat, rules changed for us, was to immediately return fire in what we thought was a threat. And that's consistent in some cases with Cold War strategy where you suppress with your weapon systems the known and suspected targets. But he took it to another step, as we understand it, and the court case is muddied. It's never that clean because a lot's at stake. Obviously their ability, death penalty could have been in consideration. A lot of women and children were found stacked like cordwood, and Marines killed them. And so the idea that these people were involved in observing or promoting or advocating or even contributing to that action warrants some investigation. Were they a threat? Did they deserve to be killed? And in some cases, there's some speculation. It came out in court, testimony was clouded, it's going to be, it's fog of war, that perhaps some of these folks were murdered. So I mentioned Haditha because it's a case familiar to the Marines. I could use my own story because I have a little bit more conscious awareness of it. But it's the idea, the leader was competent, he knew the battle drill, he did things. He protected the men and women that were left in that convoy patrol. But did he do it with integrity? And staying perceptually the reputation of at least that small organization. I can't remember if the battalion commander was relieved because then there was perceptions of cover-ups and all that stuff. It happens in war. It's part of life in war. It's unfortunate, but it's reality. You want to take leadership actions that mitigate the risk of that perception. But this was a question, did we do the right thing? I hold no judgment because I'm vulnerable. I only share what I reflect out of the paper. So if the facts are skewed, it's only intended to illustrate the point here. That war creates a climate, in extremis creates a climate where you may not demonstrate other values are important. The other study shows this. Here's another study. But the most important attributes informed by research on this is competence, trust, and loyalty to another order. So competence, you'll save my life. And 2, I trust that you'll do it in an honorable way. And 3, that you're loyal to me and I'm loyal to you. However you define it, just accept it for this argument. But it's different than the order you put. Thus, at your grade, it's imperative you become competent in your responsibilities within your lane. You become the very best officer you can be. If you're responsible for the department, you know the ins and outs of the department. Another book out there that I would encourage is, in fact, it's required reading now for all of our leaders and even smaller pre-command programs, company grade, etc., first sergeant, is the idea of power and influence beyond formal authority. It's a recognition that one of you said very well earlier, Ivan, I think it was you, that your organizations are diverse. So the real knowledge a leader has is not so much the skills that require him to get tasks done, although that's important to us, very important. It's knowing my people, knowing what makes Ebel tick, knowing what's important to him, what his interests are. Do our interests shared? And so the message I'm implying to you, perhaps I'll just, be directed, is really get to know your people on a personal level. Let them know you, and do so in a way that allows you to communicate with them, to build trust, but doesn't necessarily forfeit your role as the leader. Becoming aware and knowledgeable of people does not in any way advocate you become informal or casual, because that may not serve you well in the type of role you have. You can't necessarily be your sergeant's or your petty officer's best drinking buddy. That's not appropriate, because you may have to give the order to do something that puts them in harm's way. But importantly, you have to have appropriate respect for each other, and they will try to take advantage of that. Doesn't mean you can't share a beer with them in an appropriate setting. But you can't go out and get drunk at some bar and be juvenile in behavior and expect that they have the same expectation of you when you step up in the role in front of them in the formation. I need to get this done. That's leadership. They all matter right now for you in ways that you had. But I share that because confidence, it caught me off guard. Particularly given our profession, the bearers of arms, expects me to do my duty. And if I'm confident, my duty might have been to move through and not kill these people. I don't know how hard that is in there. I wasn't there. But I do know that something didn't smell right when women and children are stacked like cordwood in a room. Something didn't happen the way it was intended to. It could very well have been just a fog and friction war. Could have been unclear orders, which happens a lot. It could have been us interpreting the order to serve our interests, but not necessarily interests. But it had, remember that chart of the Venn diagram? It had strategic consequences. It brought real concern from those who want us to get out of the war, saying, this is the reason. America, you're not respectful, etc. Marines, you're not disciplined. Well, that's BS. But it has that effect. It changes the mood of those politicians, etc., that shape it. I got a couple minutes, and then I'm going to see if I'm to there. And then I'll ask you if you agree. Then I'm going to move on. What I recommend we do, Captain Schweitzer informed me, why don't we take, if you don't mind, a quick break. You tell me how long, Dave. And I'm going to give you some observations about behavior of the soldiers and Marines in your type of organizations, informed by a large study on the Center from Army Professional Military Ethics. And what you think people would do, and then it's going to tell you based on interviews from the service members I described, what they said they would do, and how that came about after years of fighting. Because these are the type of men and women you might inherit your command, or command responsibility, platoon command responsibility. Then I'll put you in a case study, and then we'll talk about it, and then I'll turn it over to Captain Schweitzer. Okay? So how long, Dave? 10 minutes?
5 minutes?
5 minutes? Good.